Hello, and good afternoon. Now, this week has been very eventful for national politics. The scandals revolving around Jerome Kwanazi's fingering of senior state officials continues. Although, for me, the only major news over here that we can see until further significant events develop is the intrusion of Diane Kohler Barnard and Fardil Adams into this. Although it's not entirely clear what they really were doing. I'll spend a little bit of time mentioning that in a moment, but first we'll go on to a couple of local items. Now, one of the more recent updates is one of the stories that we looked into 2 years ago. So, thanks to some local contacts with local activists, I looked into the corruption, several items of corruption in Garden Route. This includes B2 municipality, Plettenberg Bay. And there was a very, very long period during which the DA, including senior officials, had been actively protecting those guilty of corruption. While Helen Ziller and Anton Bredell were looped into issues going back as far as 2011, they chose to do nothing. Not only that, but the party also punished the whistleblower, Johan Brummer, when he first noticed these things back in 2011. He was the speaker at the time, and he was subsequently ejected from the party, supposedly for failing to pay his membership fees. This was subject to a court case. He fought this for nearly 10 years, costing the DA 3 million rand, and he won because he had paid his membership fees. This was a fraudulent act. And thankfully, due to his stubbornness, we can sort of see a little bit inside how the DA disciplines party members for misbehavior. They discipline whistleblowers. Now, Johan Brummer at the time, he didn't go to the press. What he did was he sent emails to party members, senior party members, saying, please, can you do something about this, that, and the other? And there are a few issues. There's crooked housing developments, not housing developments, crooked housing allocations involving bribery. This and a couple of other related issues have come up again because of a fellow called Bulelo Memani, who is finally facing charges. The difficulty with this story is that the man who's in charge of oversight during most of this period in which these things took place is a man called Memory Boyson. And Memory Boyson was retired a couple of years ago and promoted to Parliament. He was promoted to the provincial Parliament list. He was originally with the ANC and then crossed over to the DA in time for the 2011 elections. And he was the DA's first black mayor, and so, of course, naturally, they held him up to put him on a pedestal. But almost immediately, scandals came out. I mean, he was accused of beating his wife. He was accused of, facilitating ludicrously high discretionary spending for municipal managers and other senior managers who had come in under the ANC administration and were close friends of his. And these things, they went unpunished. What's happening now is that some of the accountability has started trickling in. My main source for this area has a contact in Hawks, and after we published that article, he said that Anton Bredell was given a phone call and told, listen, you have to start doing something about the local corruption and not protecting these people. So Anton Bredell has been trying to press a little bit harder. But another issue that they've been pressing very hard on recently is Knysna. And in Knysna, it was made pretty clear that the DA no longer would have control over this district. Because, I mean, as you can see over here, I put together a little chart so you can see how the council's going and what the demographics look like. Now, the DA had a fairly secure majority with some ACDP support and then a little independent party there, essentially meaning that the DA's majority in council was secure until the 2016 elections. And in the 2016 elections, you see it flip. And in this split council, in this hung council, you've seen a degree of instability. And there have been a few crossovers, and as a result, these coalitions don't stay the same. But you can see the DA is declining. Now, this group over here is this light green color here, Kim. Now, this was set up by a woman called Susan Campbell, and Susan Campbell was looking into local corruption. From what I understand, in order to make council matters flow a bit smoothly, she's gone a bit easier on the DA about their misbehavior. But from all accounts, this is, it's justifiable up to a degree. But it's very interesting because hers was one of the parties that objected to the action by Anton Bredell to place it under administration. Now, they've been trying to do this for years now. There's all of these stories of mountains of garbage and so on, which is true. And the wastewater treatment and the drinking water quality has gone down significantly. A few years ago, they found a dead body floating in the reservoir. That's, well, how do you put that? No good. So, yeah, but as you can see, part of the problem is that the black proportion of the population keeps climbing and the colored proportion goes down. Now, due to semigration from Gauteng and elsewhere, the white population is more or less stable. But the preferences of these people over here is shifting. And we can see it in the gentle increase in ANC support. The introduction of the EFF has stayed fairly stable at one seat, so they're not to be worried about. The PA is cut in a little bit. But everyone's sort of splitting over here. And the ANC's share of the vote is actually growing, which is remarkable. But this instability and the current domination of the ANC-led alliance over here, which includes these fellas down here, Plaaslik Besorgde Inwoners, this chunk, this sort of one seat margin, that's the governing coalition. And they've mismanaged things terribly. Not that there weren't problems before, but it's gotten more severe. And what Anton Bredell has been trying to do is to place it under provincial administration. But this requires the cooperation of the National Council of Provinces. And it requires certain steps to be met. So they've tried to jump through all of these hurdles, including setting timelines for meeting these requirements without administration being placed under administration. There's alternative plans being suggested, such as select departments being placed under administration. There's allegations that they haven't given more capacity to the administration. This seems to me to be a very unfortunate feature of the way that we do business, in that if a municipality is failing, before the responsibility of governance can be taken away from them, they have to, the provincial government first has to try and spaff money at them, in order to help them do their job. But if it's these guys in charge, what do you think is going to happen? This is a great difficulty, yes. So Anton Bredell's reached hurdles. He's been denied by the National Council of Provinces, unsurprisingly. It might have been granted in previous times. This has been granted to the DA before in other cases in the past. But the difference now is that Ramaphosa is under incredible pressure for his comments saying that the DA governs better than the ANC in local government. So it would have been a terrible look for him to allow the DA to seize control of the municipality. I think it's to be expected that it would go this way. But interesting side note here is that the Knysna Business Chamber opposed the administration, as did Kim. So Susan Campbell's party, a little local party, her reasons were very practical. She simply said that, look, placing them under administration for 90 days is not going to solve the problem, because these are deep infrastructural problems. There's an indeterminate position in the contract for fixing the water pipes and so on. So the likelihood of placing them under administration would fix anything is limited. Now, potentially placing Knysna under administration would give the provincial government access to internal documents, allowing them to determine criminal activities, which are almost certainly going on because it's the ANC governing the place. So, yeah, I mean, it would have been possible. It would have been quite good. You would have seen a lot of people forced to step down in some capacity or another. But you need good cause to do that, and the basic reasons for doing so rely on local government meeting basic standards. They can be as terrible as they like, as long as they meet basic service delivery standards. That's stuff like, water, sanitation. There's not a long list. And those they have problems with, but they haven't failed completely. So it's all very up in the air. No one's got the strongest case. And what I noticed was, why the Knysna Business Chamber? It's very odd. So I look at them, and it turns out they're composed of the same people who used to run the Knysna Tourism Board. The Knysna Tourism Board, if you can remember, was a company that was illegally running a deficit funded by the municipality. And under the Municipal Systems Act, that's against the law. You cannot fund the debts of a private entity. But this was going on for years and years and years, and it was being used as a means for building a cartel out of the service sector in various little niches in Knysna. This was uncovered in 2013 by Mike Hampton. Mike Hampton, if you know, he's under court order not to mention certain names affiliated with the corruption, two of whom are now in Action SA. It was very difficult getting all of the details out of them, because there's stuff that he legally literally cannot say to anyone, especially since I'm a journalist. He can't really tell me much. But there is public information, and of course that I will be digging into very slowly over the next few months. But what comes out of this is very interesting, because the Knysna Tourism Board becomes the Knysna Business Chamber, but a lot of their members go into Westgrow. Westgrow is this big public-private partnership that facilitates investment in the Western Cape at large. And this is part of, if you understand the DA to some degree, and you only get drips and drabs of this from out in the public. There's a little interview by Brett Heron where he talks about this, where if you are in the DA and you're in an executive position, you are sent to handle certain donors. And then what that means is you make sure that the donors get what they want out of your party so that they will donate. And everyone is, accorded certain people. And this is the main vehicle through which Alan Windy manages donors. This is his old haunt in Knysna. And so he is one of the few members of the DA whose patronage network is somewhat independent. Through Westgrow, there have been big trade deals, good trade deals even, brokered with the Western Cape as opposed to the country as a whole, which means that the Western Cape effectively has its own independent trade policy. These are good things, and but it comes with some funny stuff. Like, there are crooked members of the party who've managed to succeed because of this, such as Eleanor Bose-Spies, whose support for Alan Windy, when he was selected as premier, got her in exchange a fairly nice position in Parliament, as I understand it. I'm not sure if there was any real quid pro quo there, but it appears to be one. She she was accused of several forms of mismanagement, failures of oversight, not only back when she was a small businesswoman in Knysna, but also when she was in charge in George municipality. But these little indiscretions sort of keep the wheels turning. So what was curious to me is, why the Knysna Business Chamber, formerly this strange entity that had ties to, the former DA administration of Knysna, why they're opposing the province taking charge. My instinct would be that, as I found looking at a lot of places, and it's most severe in Stellenbosch, although and less severe elsewhere, but certainly it's a broader pattern, that the civil service, the administration, not the elected officials, are the ones who make the most of the actual decisions. A part of the reason for this is that they hold the rights over contracts, over many sort of tenders. There's different classes of tenders. If you're over 200,000 rand, you have to subject it to a council vote, but you can also sort of underprice it in order to facilitate different kinds of activities that may or may not be profitable. Because if it's under 200,000, you don't have to subject it to a council vote. Otherwise, you have. There's reasons for this, because otherwise there'd be too many things that go through council. But the other thing that the staff tends to control, staff and management tend to control, is permits. And that means that they get to say who can and can't conduct business, when and where, and for how long, and in whose benefit. This is clearly one of those things where, you hear Helen Ziller talking about how, the only thing that the local government does is service delivery. But that's not true. Look, service delivery is what they spend a lot of money on, but their real power lies in dispensing permits, because they control the entire business environment. They are the gatekeepers to every single act that any businessman undertakes. And this is an underappreciated feature of local government, especially in South Africa. You can have construction permits, use permits, different kinds of business licenses for different kinds of businesses. Your bylaws can basically constrict any business in any way they please, and this is often abused across the country. In the Western Cape, it's looking into Stellenbosch, it seems to be a certain select group of people. Some of them have more power than others. So, for example, you can take someone like Stian Carstens in Stellenbosch, who is widely regarded as being someone who acts without any oversight or any kind of reference to anyone else. And it's very hard to find information from him online. The man's kept a very low profile, but it seems from what I've managed to learn that his wife, I believe, if the information is correct, works for the the Provincial Roads Department. Now, this is very interesting, because you get the situation where you can use a contact, hypothetically. You can use a contact in the provincial administration to rubber stamp things. And if you've got very close cooperation with them, the ability to approve or disapprove of various developments gets extraordinarily high, because one of the big factors that has to be considered in order for any development to go ahead is its impact on road traffic. So this is a very influential position. And because of the way that the DA has governed all of these municipalities over the last decade or two, the people who are involved in running all of these municipalities, whether they're behaving well or badly, tend to get bounced horizontally. So you'll find the same group of people showing up from one municipality to another over and over and over and over again. So instead of having a team who can reliably be caretakers of a single municipality that they know very well, because let's say they grew up there or they whatever, you find that clusters of people will just bounce all across the municipality. Let's take Albert de Klerk, started in Midvaal, gets a cash for jobs scandal, bounces from the municipality before the council can subject him to a disciplinary inquiry, goes to Langsberg, gets kicked out of Langsberg, goes to Hessequa, and fires the entire traffic services department because one of them blew the whistle on a very, very profound corruption scandal involving the the private company that they'd contracted out to handle both the front and the back end of the ticketing service for traffic fines. So, yes, that was a 20 million rand scandal. The overseers in the traffic department were given a rap on the knuckles and allowed to remain at the same level of employment with the same benefits, whereas those who blew the whistle were punished severely. This, again, usual way of conducting business in the Western Cape is very lateral, horizontal transfers or promotion to obscurity, Parliament. Because, in a proportional representation list system, sitting in Parliament is basically free money. It's free money. No one works there. In fact, councillors seldom work. I mean, take my own municipality, for example. You have the vast majority of the work in council is being done by two Vryheidsfront councillors who do most of the other councillors' work for them. And unfortunately, they're seldom rewarded when even locals who recognize that they are the ones solving their problems for them, they will still insist, oh, that's great, thank you, but I'm voting DA this year anyway. It's a very peculiar sort of behavior. At any rate, no, it's very, very difficult to change anything here. I mean, as you can see with Knysna, moving votes over to Kim didn't increase the intensity of scrutiny of oversight. It might have if the ANC hadn't also grown in their support levels. It might have grown if there was not a growth in the PA as well. And the PA have really hammered home the instability of these areas because they happen to be a swing player. They take about 10% of their support from the black population and maybe 1 or 2 sort of tenths of 1% from the white population. And then the rest is the colored population. Most of them are former ANC voters most of the time. I think it's roughly 70-30, 60-40, tend to be mostly taking their votes from the ANC for the most part. But Knysna is unlikely to fix itself anytime soon because the demographic balance means that colored voters are on the decline. And while white people are maintaining the proportion, and they all vote DA or DA adjacent, the colored population are no longer voting DA, and the black population, who only vote for the DA in the proportion of 4%, are growing. So, that's Knysna for you. Garden route, of course, a little bit of a positive there that someone's being looked into, but it's a bit late. I mean, these things have been dragging on since 2013. No one's looked into mismanagement or failure of oversight of corruption. It's almost as if once someone steps down from office, they're immune from anything that they did while in office. It's a very peculiar way that our system behaves. But if we are to understand it realistically, we must realize South Africa is a fantastically corrupt place. There are stories of way, way more seriousness elsewhere in the country. I mean, just recently, we had a story of a municipality that was taken over at gunpoint by a councillor who had been deposed. And this is the kind of thing that will attract the attention of law enforcement and Chapter 9 institutions and what have you, far more so than property fraud. Because what's happening in the Western Cape is mainly fraud and mismanagement around developments, property, housing allocation, business licenses, cartel behavior, these things, where it's the kind of corruption that isn't going to kill your municipal services at the ground level. It means that, life can still go on, in a manner of speaking. But it strikes me that if you are going to vote the ANC, the DA, beg your pardon, into a position of authority over an ANC-run municipality. Now, remember, the ANC did not get to run the Western Cape for very long. And in that period of time, the loss of administrative skills and personnel was extremely minimal. Cadre deployment was, again, fairly minimal. Senior management to some degree. Technical staff remained mostly old white and colored employees. So everything worked just fine for a very long time. Things start going downhill when you have the hung municipalities, but cracks were showing a little bit before then as well. DA mismanaged, for example, the water facilities in Bredell, which lost them that seat to the Vryheidsfront Plus, which caused them a headache for a number of years. But now we're looking. Zille wants to run Johannesburg. Right off the bat, let's just say, quite obviously, this is a good idea. Helen Zille is the most publicly appealing and recognizable face of the DA. Even John Steenhuisen isn't as recognizable as Tannie Zille. And Helen Zille has experience of being mayor of a large and complex municipality, Cape Town. But there are some positions that she has on policy that will not help. Now, for example, one of the policies that she is the most proud of in her career has been the VPUU. This is the Violence Prevention Through Urban Upgrading policy, proposed in Cape Town in 2006, 5 years before the ANC made township upgrading part of its national policy framework. She's proud of this because, well, I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't seem to decrease violence. It increases informal settlement. The Western Cape is the only province in the country where the rate of informal housing has been growing for the last 20 years. Everywhere else, it's been falling. People are moving into formal houses. However, in the Western Cape, the opposite is true. More people are moving into informal housing than there are houses built. It's restricting land availability. It's driving property prices up as a consequence. This means there's more pressure on developers. And as there's more pressure on developers, there's also more profit, which means access and permission becomes key. This is why areas like Stellenbosch have seen such an enormous amount of, let's call it, dubious practices, specifics of which will take me a while to pull out, and because of the individuals who are involved in this can be quite dangerous, I will have to make sure that my facts are extremely airtight on this matter. But looking into it, I've got some sources, I've got some primary documents as well, and we'll see. But this VPUU policy, which is now, it's facilitated by an NGO, was involved a deal with the German Development Bank, who have lots of profitable loans to DA-run municipalities, usually profiting about 30 to 40, sometimes over million euros every time. It's a fairly reasonable way to make money, so long as these places prioritize the loans, their debt servicing payment over other things, because Cape Town writes off several billion rand each budget cycle, and they've got to prioritize who to pay first. And of course, you feed the big fish first because they bite harder. But this little project involving the German Development Bank, what it does is it gives free title deeds to anyone who steals land. There is little attempt to actively manage land invasions. There was a brief spurt of activity when Jordan Hill-Lewis came in charge of the city, but even under his purview, there has been a lot of asymmetric focus. For example, people will be well aware of the amount of illegal settlements that have not been touched in many places, while settlements like in Temba small farms, where a community of subsistence farmers, colored farmers, have inhabited an abandoned farm, which was abandoned by its owner in, I believe, 1990, before the current administration, the current national administration even. They've occupied this area for 35 years. And while some of the farmers there are newcomers, these people are, a reasonable farming community in a decent-sized green area within the metro, one of the last remaining. But in order to build housing for 30,000 newcomers from the Eastern Cape, the city and the provincial government got together and, in violation of a court order from 2010, they have been trying to force the people to move using a combination of fraud, misinformation, intimidation, bribery. Some of the people who have been moved away have been, placed in little, housing units and so on. Those ugly things with the tiny little windows that we know so well from the new builds. Placed on SASSA grants, taken away from their access to their former, source of work and income, which is, as unsexy as it sounds, pig farming. Now, I can understand some people might want to leave small-scale subsistence pig farming for SASSA grants, but it's not much of a benefit, and I think a lot of them are regretting it. I still have to go down and meet them in person probably sometime this coming week and gather interviews, and then I can finally put this thing to bed and put it together. But aside from the land invasions, part of the problem is the absolute failure of oversight over municipal management and staff. As a consequence of this, what we are seeing, is that the DA are going to go into government in the metros and fail to achieve anything. Now, they've had the experience before in 2016, and they lost in 2021. And part of the reason for this is that not only did they fail to root out the corruption, they didn't fail to even interrupt it. Now, understanding Nelson Mandela Bay, they figured out a new way to engage in corruption while the ANC networks, they figured out how to get engaged in corruption without access or control of council. So they block council measures, yes, because you've got a hung council, you can do a lot. That's one method. But the other way is through the legal office, where you tweak evergreen contracts. An evergreen contract can just expand and expand and expand. The primary contractor can just subcontract and subcontract and subcontract. And so you have an almost unlimited money tap, and you can loot the entire thing dry without having a single person on the board. You can destroy infrastructure using your cadres in the unions or outside of it. And this happened regularly. You just have to speak to people running the show at the time. The amount of fires that they had to put out in PE because of sabotage is extraordinary. Tshwane was different. Tshwane, they were disrupted by an illegal act of placing them under administration. This is less likely now that the ANC has got to behave itself in the GNU. But there were other problems. Tshwane never gained control of its department. Silius Brink was subject to a lot of interruption and interference in many different departments. But part of the problem was that there was a decision to build bridges with the ANC cadres in the civil service and make bygones be bygones, because the leaders of the DA have firmly forbidden any political hiring and firing. So what they did was hand over 10-year contracts to a huge swathe of staff and management once they took power. This means that they'd given their enemies permanent seats at the table. And consequently, they deal with all kind of mess. They get sabotaged by their own employees. This is foolish, extremely foolish. But let's say now you're going to place people in charge and you don't want corruption scandals. You've maybe got a year to clean house. After that, any corruption scandals will be swept under the rug because it's now bad press. You're in charge. Why is it still going on? Why is this happening? So after you do a little bit of spring cleaning and it doesn't work out and you can't get rid of the people because they're on permanent contracts, then you just say, well, let's try and keep it out of the public eye. And once that management problem keeps going. You see it went on for 9 years at Stellenbosch. We've had this little cabal that's in charge now. We've had them restricting access from elected officials. We've had them getting involved in questionable activities with property developers and so on. One of the property developers who I'm interested in looking at is apparently going to be the next mayor. This is the internal rumors that he's going to be replacing the current mayor, Mr. Fusser. Now, I understand why they're doing this. Fusser apparently still keeps in good contact with the former mayor whose misbehavior was caused her to be removed, Geesie van Deventer. Apparently they're still in close contact. So trying to clean house, they pick a local businessman in good standing. Although from what I've heard, he's not exactly an independent in these questions. So what I'm saying is that I don't have any confidence. I don't have any confidence that the DA can actually straighten up Johannesburg. And while, yes, it's obviously the better choice than the ANC, I'm not disputing that, I am simply saying that you are not going to see that city turn around. It's not going to. And there's a certain point at which, people just start giving up. All your talented bureaucrats just start packing their bags. It started happening in a lot of places. People get very, very sick of the inability to just be accepted in putting a decent, cognizant effort in. So, on the plus side, we have been seeing some nice little proposals in the prison system. So, we'll go back to that in a minute. But I'm going to read you something that's quite interesting. And that will be an open letter that was written to us about expropriation without compensation. Now, let me just share the screen. Come on, you silly sausage. There we go. So, now Weber Wenzel is one of the big law firms. And let's just have a look at this. So now this is from one of our followers on social media. There's a guy called Kerm. I'm not going to, as in like Kermit the Frog. Now, I'm not going to reveal who he is. He's asked me not to mention anything about what he does for a living, even, because he says that might make him identifiable. But he said that there's a big problem with this EWC story. So you've got a number of law firms who've repeated this particular story about, how, expropriation's not all that bad. Don't worry about it and so on, And part of the reason is that they're going to profit a great deal, at least in the short term, from the amount of chaos that it'll cause and how many people are going to be desperate to try and get hold of their property once it gets taken away from them. Okay. So, here we go. Let's say, I'm just going to read it. In light of the recent battle to expropriate a 30 million rand property in Ekurhuleni, we accepted a critique of some of the legal advice surrounding the egregious law as it is used to test. All big five law firms offered similar advice, but Weber Wenzel has been more extreme. In light of this, Kerm, posting as Kermit on social media, has offered a lengthy and detailed criticism of their stance on the matter and addresses his concerns to the law firm. The original FAQ that they released has been deleted, and no record of it was captured on the Internet Archive. Several of the points are available in other articles where they've been interviewed. But according to Kermit himself, he says 30 or more misrepresentations of the law, but I need to verify. Get a screenshot of this before they remove it. So, this is sort of just a little brief thing of what he says to contextualize the message. So Weber Wenzel has apparently got a retainer with the ANC, so we'll see. Expropriation without compensation will have far-reaching impacts on not only the affected property, but the entire economy. Protection of private property rights are fundamental to private investment and economic growth. Now, this letter, he's addressing it to the law firm, so you've got to look at it in that light. Directly impacts unemployment. A simple comparison to Zimbabwe's land reform program, including legislation, should have been enough to raise the alarm about potential catastrophic impacts for South Africa. But could you please clarify why you've been misrepresenting both the content and political ramifications of the EWC bill? Also, please clarify any vested interest in this matter. You not only have a duty to warn clients, but the public as a whole. This will affect all of us. Various stakeholders also rely on professional positions to inform decisions affecting their livelihoods. One document, the EWC Frequently Asked Questions 2025, also contains multiple misrepresentations. These have also been repeated in various publications and presentations, so please consider your official position on EWC. Feel welcome to respond to any claims in the below assessment which you believe to be inaccurate. Question 1. What is the Expropriation Act and why does it matter? The answer, quoted from the original source, the Weber Wenzel legal opinion they put out there, was the Act empowers the state to expropriate property for public purposes or in the public interest, subject to just and equitable compensation under Section 25.3 of the Constitution. It matters because it addresses historical dispossession while introducing safeguards against arbitrary takings. Unlike the 1975 Act, explicitly allows nil compensation in limited cases but requires rigorous justification. Kermit's response is that the Act does not introduce safeguards against arbitrary takings. The state decides expropriation with owners bearing challenge costs. Secondly, the law does not allow limited cases. Examples provided are the examples provided are non-exhaustive. The only condition is that public interest outweighs private interest. Also ignores cases where state offers. Number 3, does not require any rigorous justification. The state can issue notice, and onus is on owner to defend in mediation in courts. The court is only needed to determine if public interest outweighs private interest. And I mean, if you think about the way people discuss it now, public interest always outweighs private interest because the public is everybody and the private is one person. So anytime you want to redistribute wealth, it's in the public interest, universally, almost by definition, if you think about it. I mean, that's the democratic principle at its heart. How could you justify anything else? If you see one guy's got more stuff than anyone else, or he's got something that someone else wants, if that someone else is more than 2 people, then they have a right to take his stuff. That's the principle at play. That's what it means. That's how everyone understands it. I mean, everyone will tell you that that principle is not how they see it. Of course not. How could it be? But if you see someone with a large house and you see 10 homeless people and say, well, why shouldn't you dispossess him and give it to the homeless? Why shouldn't you? And why do you have to compensate him? What has he done to earn what he has in life? It's all completely arbitrary. You could have been born to another parent. Your property rights don't mean anything. And who disagrees with this? Who could possibly argue with confidence against this in public? Who's a member of any major party? And they listen to the DA would defend and say, yes, but well, we can't really go on like that, you know. But they believe in wealth redistribution. They believe that housing should be handed over to people even without respecting property rights. They support land invasions. They back land invasions. They back impunity for land invasions. They believe that people who invade land have more entitlement to housing than anyone else. There's nobody who's more entitled to housing than those who will steal it. So this is the position of the DA. If you look at their practical behavior, forget what they say in public. So how well do you think they'll argue against this? I think they're going to struggle to make a very firm case. But, we've seen this actually. I mean, you look at, in practice, you look at Dean McPherson, how he has repeatedly said that there's nothing wrong with the Expropriation Act. It's perfectly fine. It's not a threat. And in fact, it could be used to help grow the economy. So, it's not really a position that anyone's really opposed to. And I mean, we can talk about our friends in the Cape Independence movement up into and including the Fayette Swamp Plus, but we are not a major voice in society yet. Most of us are still most people who support Cape Independence still have other things going on in their lives and haven't learned to participate in politics. And those who have a legacy stake in the system are unfortunately those who are speaking for us. So, not much to say there. Productive. So here we go. It talks about how it's not only in non-exhaustive circumstances. Sorry, hold on. The Weber Wenzel saying that it's only in non-exhaustive scenarios misrepresents expropriation without compensation. Only in, as a phrase, also contradicts non-exhaustive. If it's non-exhaustive, then it's unlimited. So, the author apparently doesn't know the definition of basic words. Productive land is not excluded. Use is only one factor that is considered when expropriating. Now, of course, none of this is considered in context of the Land Courts Act, which once it gets implemented is just going to blow the whole thing up, because at the end of the day, what does the Land Courts Act do? It provides a new court system that can rubber stamp any of these applications, right? So here's how it works. The state, or any organ of the state, may expropriate any land for any reason if they think it's in the public interest, and they don't have to compensate you at all. Then you have to go through a court case, and in this case, the expropriation happened in 2019, and they are only seeing the courts next year. So that is, how many years is that? 19 plus 7 years. So 7 years waiting for the courts to even hear your case. And then the law is explicitly designed to make your rights as negotiable as possible. Now, I'm going to share something interesting. I'm going to deviate from the Weber Wenzel's thing, because frankly, I mean, that's a long thing. You'd be better off reading it than listening to me read it to you, because it takes much longer. But I'm going to pick this. Let me see. So this is an interesting report. So I had a look at, so that's 93 Constitution, 96 Constitution. Okay, here we go. So now I did an interesting little comparison some time ago for Solidarity. I'm just got to try and remember if I've got my right spot here. So there's actually an interesting process. So you've got all of these different things about, okay, how can you be discriminated against in the law? Because strictly speaking, there's no law against discrimination, only unfair discrimination. And unfair is left up to the opinion, whoever's banging the gavel. They can just decide that, well, it's okay because it's fair to discriminate against these people and these people. So that's fine, right? So notice they qualify any kind of discrimination with unfairly. Everyone is entitled to be equal in the law, except unless we think it's fair. And like, listen to this. I mean, they even say it's unfair unless it's established that it's fair. Okay, well, geez, whoever's writing this needs a brain examined. But anyway, at a deeper level, the core feature is how the document allows for the limitation of rights. Now, no one looks at our Constitution this way. Everyone likes to hope and believe that it's designed to protect this, that, and the other, but it's actually a pernicious little document that the second the balance of forces are no longer in favor of your of your rights being protected, and you become a decent scapegoat, then, well, whatever. You can you can do whatever you like. And frankly, that's how most political systems work, regardless of what their constitution says, because if power requires that you break the constitution will be broken. It happens all the time in every single country, Western, Eastern, Southern, doesn't matter. You know, you can look at the United States at how many times people's freedom of speech has been infringed through state actors wielding private entities as a, sheepdip for their own little operations. I don't need to tell you guys about that, but it's fairly common for people's rights to be violated by force or fraud in many different cases. I mean, recently came out that January 6 was infiltrated by over 400 federal agents who participated in the protests, several of whom acted as agents provocateurs. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I'll read into that later, but it's not really pertinent to my context, so I'll have to move on. So the thing is, law of general application, sure, but the limitation is reasonable and justifiable in an open and democratic society based on blah, blah, blah. Okay. But it's not like there's nothing is negotiable. It's not like here's a hard line, this is a non-negotiable. It's everything here is negotiable. So human dignity, equality, and freedom, and basically it's every case, every law that you want to pass, if it's unconstitutional, right, and you've tried something else first, then, well, why not? I mean, it seems that, okay, it should be reasonable if you're taking everything in the spirit and you think these words just mean good things, don't do bad things. But the words kind of have meaning, and some of the meanings of these words are broader and squishier than others. So here's my argument. I say, while this seems eminently reasonable, it explicitly renders all rights negotiable in light of the general purpose of the Constitution and the purpose of the governing program. Notice, the purpose of the limitation, right? Limitation of a right. So the article makes it rather clear that the nature of the purpose of limitation of a right is that is the ultimate test, not the right itself. It means that the spirit of the promises made in the settlement are not actually represented in the Constitution except as lip service. So this is a separate discussion about whether or not the 1994 sort of the discussions had in 1994 were in good faith or not, which, honestly, seriously, I don't know why anyone would think for a second they were, but, sometimes you have to make the case because someone's paying you to do so, and I think I did an okay job with it. So why is it built this way? I mean, you've got some funny things like this. I mean, you've got Section 25 itself, right? So for the purpose of the section, the public interest includes the nation's commitment to land reform and to reforms to bring about equitable access to all of South Africa's natural resources, and property is not limited to land. So this is an extremely wide open door, right? I mean, there's no natural restriction. I mean, of course, the judge has a lot of leeway to decide one way or the other once the stuff hits constitutional court. So we'll see how that goes. But at its core, what we're really looking at is a situation where there are no backstops. It comes down to whether or not the Constitutional Court judges feel in the mood to do one thing or another. Such is life, such is how it goes. I think part of the problem is that, even Sakelichers, amazing as they are, all they've got to say is, well, we keep challenging it and we keep arguing our case as best we can. But I think we're starting to reach a case where we have to ask ourselves what we're going to do when land starts being taken. What are you going to do? You're going to do nothing, I'm sure, right? But we can't be allowing that to happen. We have to figure out something, and we have to figure out how to act. If the government wants to take your land, you're going to have to be able to say no, one way or another. Anyhow, I think I'm done here. I'm just, yeah. I think next week, hopefully, there'll be more things happening in the Cape. But at the moment, things have been rather quiet, relatively speaking, aside from the taxis and the. But major developments have been fairly slow. And I have been focused, unfortunately, quite heavily on investigative pieces, which take up a lot of my time. But next week we'll be back on form, I hope. Thank you.